Welcome to Still a Part of Us, a podcast about stillbirth and infant loss. I'm Lee.
And I'm Winter, and today we're going to introduce ourselves. We're going to introduce our podcast, Still a Part of Us, our whys, what we hope to achieve with this podcast, and how to support and find our show. So let's get started. Hello, Lee.
Hello, Winter. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay.
Good.
Doing okay.
We've got a goal today. We've got to talk about our podcast.
Oh, yes. That is a good goal.
We first wanted to tell you a little bit about why we're doing this podcast. Well, actually, we need to introduce ourselves, right? Let's talk a little bit about ourselves, who we are, why you should listen to us, and then we'll segue into why this podcast. Why in the world are we doing this podcast? Do you want to start out, Lee, or should I start out?
I'll start out.
Okay.
My name is Lee.
Hey, Lee.
Hello. I am a husband and father to two.
You're my husband. I just want to point that out.
That's a good point out.
You're not anybody else's husband. You're my husband.
Well, you do claim me, I guess. And we have two children. We have a daughter, and then we have a son named Brandon. Myself, I love many things. I'm a lover of soccer. I love food. I am a chef, and I have a small business at the farmer's market making what's called eggets.
They're like Hong Kong bubble waffles, if you know what those are.
Custard waffle, bubble waffles. Yeah, I have facial hair, and I quite love my facial hair.
He does. It's good facial hair.
Well, thank you. I do not like the hot weather, and I do not like wasps. Those are two things that I detest.
Yeah. He doesn't really love celery either, everybody.
I could tolerate celery.
But he hates wasps. Sorry, guys. That was rough. And he doesn't like hot weather very much at all.
Winter,
yes.
Tell us about yourself.
So I'm Winter Red, and my husband is Lee, who just introduced himself. And so, of course, I'm the mother of two as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about them in a little bit. But I am a pharmacist during the day, and I enjoy it very much. I do research studies, and I really enjoy it. I also podcast in other locations, including Hungry Squared, which is a podcast about food because we're food people. Lee is our editor on that one. He will be an occasional guest host, but most of the time he's the back end guy and helps out with that. So I appreciate that, Lee.
You're welcome. And
I really like to just hang out with my family. I love also just writing. I love podcasting. Those are kind of the main things. I love gardening too. I've kind of gotten into succulents lately. I don't know why, but I just have. So
she's also very good at photography. She's humble about that, but
oh, you're very nice, Lee. And I do love to bake. Lee is the chef in the family. I am the baker in the family. I would say I'm not a bad cook, but Lee is rubbish at baking. He's not rubbish. He can make a couple of things pretty well.
I don't have the patience for baking.
That might be him. Anyway, so that is a little bit about us. We actually live in the greater Salt Lake area of Utah. That's just a little bit about us and who we are and what we like to do. Lee mentioned that we have two children. We have a daughter. She's 4 years old. And we had a son, and his name is Brandon. And he was stillborn. He was a late-term stillbirth last year in July of 2018. And this brings us to why we're doing this podcast.
I would like to add, Winter has been instrumental in bringing me to this podcast. She has an internal desire to bring awareness to the world about this subject. And some of the reasons why I am on the podcast, and I'll let Winter talk about her reasons. Some of my reasons are, especially when we're talking with other parents who have experienced loss, be it stillbirth or infant loss, I have an inner feeling of connection with them, knowing that I am not alone. And that's been one of the biggest support to me in these times of hurt for myself, is being able to connect with others who I know have also experienced this. It's a wonderful connection, even though it's a sad connection. Another thing, I don't want to, sometimes when I'm talking with other parents about our children, yes, we have two children. One of them is with us and one of them is not with us. And sometimes bringing that up brings feelings of pity or feelings of patronization, or I don't ever want to feel that I am ashamed to bring up my son even though he has passed away. And so having this dialogue where I can talk about my son and other fathers and mothers can talk about their children, where it's not a pity party or a shameful event, I think that will help us as well. And then another reason, it's also been helpful to, I don't want to say educate people on how to approach parents who have experienced loss. But there has been dialogues where we say, you probably shouldn't say that to me. That could be very hurtful if you say it to somebody else. And I think having an open dialogue where we can shed light on stuff that is sort of appropriate and stuff that isn't appropriate to be said to parents of loss, I think that's helpful. Winter, what about you? What are your reasons for this podcast?
We actually went recently to our therapist. And one of the things that I said, and I remember saying, like, I said this because I was like, it was so shocking to me when I realized this. But when I was pregnant with our first child and also with Brandon, stillbirth was never on my radar. Never, ever. I was so shocked and so sad when we found out Brandon had passed away. And so I want this to be kind of a little bit of an awareness campaign. Like, this can happen. There are some things that you can do to prevent it. We don't know all of the reasons why stillbirth happens. So it happens. There are some things that they talk about that can help prevent it, or at least keep an eye on anything that would give you a clue that your child is in distress. So hopefully this is a little bit of awareness. Another reason why I really wanted to start this podcast is that as Lee and I have grieved over the last year, we have had I've come to discover that Lee has had a very different experience than I did when I gave birth to Brandon. I had feelings of joy and obviously sadness, but feelings of joy. While as I've talked to Lee and we've, gone to therapists and such, I've discovered that Lee had a very different experience than I do. And he's grieved very differently than I have this last year and still do. And so we wanted to call out, not call out, I guess. It's more, I wanted to show that women are different than men. We grieve differently. And I wanted the moms and the dads to share stories about their children and to give advice on their experience, because it's so different. Everybody's so different. And hopefully somebody's advice can help you, can help somebody else in your life that is going through the same thing. And so that's really important to me of why we've formatted the show the way we have. And then kind of the last reason that I think that I wanted to start the show is because I felt called to do it. It was kind of a nudge at first. And it was actually very early on after Brandon had passed away. It was probably within a month of his passing. And I felt like we should record this. This needs to be recorded. This story, what I remember, these things that happened to us, the emotions that we felt, those need to be recorded. And as the months went by, I felt it wasn't more of a nudge. It was kind of shoving. It was like, you need to do this. And thankfully, Lee has been gracious enough to say, yes, I want to do this. I am happy to interview people as well to be involved in this project. And so we've jumped in and we're going to do this. It's a little bit of a daunting task, I think. I don't know what you think, Lee, but it seems a little scary to think about.
Not just scary, but it's going to be emotional for us too.
Yeah, it is. It really will be. I'm sure it will be. So that's kind of why we're doing our podcast. And we hope that we can find connection, like Lee said. We can find a place to share our stories without feeling ashamed of it or feeling like, oh, we're just going to get a pity party from other people. But it's a way to kind of celebrate our child, a way to... Actually, I kind of think this is a little bonus reason why we're doing this, is that if you haven't been able to share your story because people won't talk about it with you, you can share your story and tell them that you shared the story on the podcast, and they can listen to it and they will get the full story. Does that make sense? I don't know. Does that make sense, Lee?
Yeah, it does. It makes sense that they, in their own privacy, can listen to your story without having to, because sometimes people can't face the discomfort, and so they don't want to bring it up. Yeah. But if you say, hey, look, I recorded with this podcast and here's my story, then they can in their own privacy listen to it. And it could be good for you and for them.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so that brings us to a little bit about the format. So what can you expect? What can we expect whenever you tune into our podcast?
So our podcast is going to be a little bit different than normal podcasts. We are going to be hopefully interviewing both the mothers and the fathers separately. And there's going to be 2 segments to each of those interviews. There's going to be the story, and then there's going to be an episode about like advice.
So what do you mean by the story?
So the story of the birth from the mother's perspective and from the father's perspective. And then each of those are going to be separate episodes. And then each mother and each father is also going to have an advice episode where they talk about, this is something that really helped us, or hey, this was something that really just was not a good thing to have done. And it's just going to be a short advice segment.
I think the goal of the advice episodes will be to help those people that have a lost mom or lost dad in their life. They can maybe get some advice from somebody that is experiencing this, and they can help them in a meaningful way that will help them through this tragedy.
Yeah, I do agree with that, Winter. It could help them and help the people around them. So the formats are going to be an interview with hopefully the mother and the father, and then advice episodes from the mother and the father. And you can find these episodes on the 1st and the 15th of each month. No matter what day it is, it's the 1st and the 15th.
That's really weird for podcast land. So most people do it like, we're doing it every Tuesday and it's going to come out at this time. We decided to do the 1st and the 15th because we could possibly be launching between 2 to 4 episodes at any given time. So, and we wanted to send it out all in one cluster. So it's basically a family of episodes. If you think of it that way, we'll send out a family of episodes on the 1st and another family's worth of episodes on the 15th. Just so that you can, if you want to hear the mom story side of the story, great. And you can also hear the dad side of the story. You don't have to wait for it to come out the next week. It'll just all be there so you can consume it that way.
Exactly. And in addition to their episodes being aired, each family is going to be receiving a written transcription of their episode and also an audio version of their interviews and advice in episodes.
We thought this was really important because, like I said, when I first, I felt really strongly that we should be recording these stories. So we wanted to make sure that everybody had a copy of what happened, their birth story written down somewhere. And I don't know if I think a lot of moms and dads do that, but this will be a sure way of getting that into their hands and for their family history, for their genealogy, for their future posterity to see that and to acknowledge that they had a child that passed away.
We're also planning on trying to arrange interviews with professionals in the health community, psychology, and counselors. And we're going to have interviews with them that will come out as well, where hopefully we'll be able to have some good discussion about the subject of loss and how to help each other in that loss.
Okay, so that's going to be the general format and when they're going to come out. One thing that we wanted to do that's going to be a little different and funny, at the very end of every single episode, we will have a funny quote because we're talking about really heavy, hard, sad stuff here, and it can be rough. So we're going to try and end on a funny note, a lighter note, so that you have a little split second in the day that you get to laugh. Hopefully it's funny. Lee's going to choose them out. It's not up to me. It's going to be Lee. He's just been cracking himself up over here.
I have been reading many funny quotes.
Yes. So make sure you stick around to the end after the credits and everything like that. There will be just a quick little quote at the end. So hopefully that'll be a little bright spot of sunshine in your day or silly spot of sunshine in your day. They're pretty silly quotes, I'm just saying.
Good little chuckle.
Yep, exactly. A word of warning to you, our listeners. Obviously, we're going to be talking about birth. We're going to be talking about death. And so be warned that there's going to be possible graphic descriptions about birth and maybe of the death. So we just want to put that out there. The second thing I want to let you know about is that because this is a very sensitive topic and really hard for a lot of people, we're talking about hard, heavy, tough things. There are triggers everywhere. If you know that you are not in a good place, don't listen to our podcast. you might need some time. Okay. So respect yourself and respect where you're at in the grieving process. Realize that this show, these episodes will be full of triggers because we're going to be talking about death. We're going to be talking about stillbirth. We're going to be talking about little babies passing away. And that's hard. We want you to be healthy, emotionally safe. So if you need help, go get proper help. This show is not to diagnose anything. We're not trying to do anything like that. We're just trying to share stories. So if you need help, get help. There are triggers. That's all I want to say. There's a lot of triggers in these shows, so be aware. And then the last thing is that these families are coming onto our show. These families that are sharing their stories are sharing something that is near and dear to their heart, something that is very vulnerable, that is very hard for them. It's going to be hard. We've had tears on the show already. And we ask that you, our listeners, our audience members, treat these people with respect and civility. If you don't agree with their religion, their political point of view, their whatever, the way they raise their child, whatever, please treat our interviewees with respect, these moms and dads with respect. We will not tolerate that on any of our social media. If there's any sort of hate on our social media, you will be blocked. So that's just an invitation to be respectful and to be civil, because that's what we expect from this audience. Anyway, Lee, where can people find us?
The most important thing to know is our website, stillapartofus.com. There will be the show notes from the interviews and advice episodes with links. If there's need for links, you'll be able to find it there. You'll also be able to find our Facebook and Instagram links, and you'll be able to sign up for our newsletter there. And if you would like to show financial support, head on over to the website, and there will be a donate button that will help with the production cost of this podcast.
The thing that's going to help our podcast the most is if you subscribe to the podcast, and not just listen to an episode here and there, but to actually subscribe to the podcast and to share it with someone who may need it and tell them to subscribe to it, because that's how people find us, is if people have subscribed to our podcast. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts. Heck, you can ask Alexa or your Google Home device to play our podcast, because it will be there as well. So thanks for joining us for this introductory episode. Lee, thanks for being here with me. I love you.
Thanks for being with me. I love you too.
And to our audience members, our listeners, thank you so much for helping us remember our children are still a part of us.
We'll see you on the 1st and 15th. Time for the funny quote. When tempted to fight fire with fire, remember, the fire department uses water. Anonymous.